Hello, everybody, and welcome to another UKC panel discussion. I'm Louis. I'm joined, of course, by Neil and by Maddy. And this week, we're continuing our advanced fingerboarding discussion. Last time, we didn't quite get through all of the questions that we wanted to, so we've got a load more to go through today. So I hope you enjoy it. Apologies for everyone whose names I'm mispronouncing on this, but Aquinu, I'm going to guess, asks something which I assume everyone is worried about, which is, whilst doing my super advanced fingerboarding, getting really, really strong and trying really hard, how do I avoid getting injured? And when it is obviously supposed to be really stressful and we're supposed to have worked feeling joints, how do you tell the difference between a tweak and just generally being tired? Maddy, you go first.
Go on.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think that we've already, like Neil's already talked about some of the antagonist work that goes alongside fingerboarding. And we also spoke about that in the beginner's fingerboarding one as well. So maybe I'll go along a little bit more the side of things of monitoring and how you structure your training. I think that when you're starting to get to a more advanced level with fingerboarding, often this goes hand in hand with just a higher training load anyway. So I think thinking about how you maybe arrange your training within your week, as well as how you order training within a session, especially if people are doing maybe 2 fingerboard sessions in a day, potentially split into the morning and the evening. So this can actually play into making better adaptations as well, because when people start to sort of think about the quality that they want from their fingerboarding, obviously when you go into that session, you want to be able to hit the training stimulus reliably. But this also plays into it with injury because it stops you over fatiguing any one element. And I think a little bit of a different scenario, because obviously at the moment we are training, a lot of people training at home on a fingerboard, and they're not getting that combination of a lot of fingerboarding with climbing, which I think is where that injury came in. So say for me, last week, did my fingerboard session, was not meant to go on my board. I do luckily have a board, started doing a max move session, which is like, I know, I think I'm like, in this as a profession, I know about it, but I just couldn't help myself, and these things happen, and did pick up a finger tweak. And I think that is quite commonly where they come when people are starting to advance fingerboarding alongside training. And I think it's being quite sort of aware of feelings in your fingers and what are different feelings. And it can be hard because obviously fatigue, I guess, to me is something that reduces performance. So say you're doing your fingerboard sessions and you start a fingerboard session and you can't hit your weight, but there's no pain in any very specific area. This is likely fatigue. And that can also be like when you wake up, maybe a bit of a creaky feeling or a stiffness in your hands or your forearms. And basically, obviously, it should recover within like a day or two. Okay. When you have a tweak, either acutely, I think you can often feel a certain point where if you apply a bit of pressure, you can feel discomfort or pain. Or if you do quite a light pull in a certain position. So for me at the moment, if I pull into my own palm like this, I can feel discomfort in a very like particular part of my finger. This is likely a tweak. I guess a tweak is some damage to a specific area that is disproportional to that slight damage you're causing over the whole area that you're wanting to recover from and adapt to. And I think that comes with feeling that, being aware of it. And then I guess for me, and I guess when I talk to people I work with, kind of asking yourself, like, is it worth it? When you go into that week, like, is it worth continuing to train and pushing it? Or actually, should you just take 1 week off? Like with most, like if it's quite a minor tweak, 1 week off fingerboarding, what have you got to lose, versus trying to keep it up your sessions and making the injury worse or chronic. And I think that that's something that when people get really into their fingerboarding, they do actually find it quite hard to be objective about that. And then it's just monitoring that pain over time and building very gradually back into your fingerboarding. Something I found quite useful for reducing injury risk is trying to do some self-massage as well, maybe on your forearms or your extensors, alongside maybe some of I think a lot of people are quite good at maybe wanting to stretch, but I mean, especially for me, with my joints, I actually don't feel a stretch very well, even if I put my joint to its full range of motion. So I think for me, trying to prevent like a buildup of tightness, some people have those fancy arm aids. I don't have one of those. But if you take a ball and you put it on the table and you sort of roll your forearm along it, this can be quite a nice way to get that.
Really good advice. And Neil, anything to add?
I think well said, Maddy. I mean, we could go at this one all day, and I think you've covered the most important points. But I just think, I mean, on the grounds that maybe we should have done this on the beginners fingerboarding chat, because I know that, thing is though, that there might be some people who are watching this who are at an advanced level and who haven't had a finger tweak yet. And I just know there's this thing where a lot of climbers think, oh, it's just a tiny little thing, I'm not going to let that stop play. You know, it seems like it's not like a sprinter blowing a hamstring or something kind of catastrophic where like half the body implodes. It's this tiny little thing. And you think, I shouldn't like duck out. You know, people think that like it's almost like a test to push on and like put up with the pain, and to say, absolutely, that is not the way to go. And this tiny little thing is actually a massively significant thing in the interest of, you know, climbing performance, which is hanging from your fingers on small edges. And if that finger is really, really hurting, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. And as Maddy says, if you carry on doing it, it's going to get a lot more serious. But the cool thing is, again, I mean, I'm from that generation where we used to get finger injury and then we'd just stop for 3 weeks, more like 3 months sometimes, do nothing. You know, it's like, not only should you be hitting up your rehab, and, you know, once, you know, if you've got if you've got a really severe finger tweak, you don't want to start loading it too soon, but like as soon as you're ready, start doing some eccentric work, you know, with a stretch band. You know, you can start doing specific rehab for the finger, squeeze ball work and so on. And then moving into that phase of progressive loading to re-strengthen it on the board with your foot in a stirrup, you know, lots of weight for assistance, et cetera, et cetera. You can start doing that. But the cool thing is, simultaneously, you can be hitting up all these other types of training. You can be doing cardio, you can be doing stretching, you can be doing antagonists. Like a popular question I get asked a lot is, should you do like bar, you know, can you hang from a bar and do pull-ups, lock-offs, one armers, front levers? This is very much case by case. Some finger injuries, you'll find that you can still hang on a bar or jugs on your hangboard and it's not going to hurt your finger. If it's a more severe injury or a certain type of finger tweak, it's going to hurt when you hang off the jugs, in which case don't do it. Pain is always, you know, from the physios that I've worked with over the years, I mean, there's so much complexity here, but they always distill it down to this one simple piece of advice, which is let pain be the guide. And if it hurts, don't do it.
I was just going to say one thing, a sort of slightly different side of things, which is as people get into more advanced fingerboarding, and if they are noticing like quite big imbalances, potentially between fingers, if they're starting to isolate down fingers, or between grip types, or between hands, I think that trying to balance those out has been so like big imbalances there has been linked to higher injury risk, because as you can imagine, you start to like favor certain fingers or certain hands, or like when a finger slips, you obviously overload other fingers, which if there's then big discrepancies between the strength in those, that can lead to injury. So if people are wanting to sort of look to reduce injury risk, you know, they've got healthy fingers, they're doing their antagonist work, then actually sort of just being aware and maybe doing a little self-assessment on some of that could be quite a useful way to highlight any of those big discrepancies. And that could be something to work on in balancing them out, which will likely benefit your finger strength, but also might reduce injury. And on the point of massage as well, I actually just realized, because I'm massaging it at the moment, is along with the forearms and extensors, like the hands and the lumbricals. And I do know a few people that get injuries down there, because if it gets really tight and then your fingers split, not on the fingerboard necessarily, but you know, when you go back to climbing, then keeping that massaged as well can be quite a nice way to keep your hands healthy.
That's really good.
Can I just drop in one more? I think, because we're sort of going around the whole subject of what do tweaks feel like, how do you deal with them, how do you prevent them? But I think a really important thing is preloading, or if you like doing test sets before you go into like a relatively intense set of max hangs. I mean, something that I will do almost now like routinely without thinking about it is I'll just test the load and then back away and then go and do the set, just so your fingers kind of, you get like 70, 80, 90% of it, and you just get a feel of it. And then you're almost like your mind knows what's coming, your fingers know what's coming, and then you do your set. I really think, I think we spoke before about that kind of mind-body connection in hangboarding. I think it's so important. I think it benefits us in a whole variety of ways, and injury prevention is one of them. Like connect your mind with your fingers, get ready for the feedback that your fingers are going to give you, and more importantly than anything else is just get ready to let go, because if a sudden tweak comes on, you're going to have percentages of a second in order to let go, so you better be concentrating.
That's a really clever idea. Well, okay, so a question from Jeremy Parker, who's I think this is a way that we could make fingerboarding slightly more familiar to real climbing. That's something I've wanted as well. But Jeremy was asking, is it worth doing repeaters with different grip types? And Jeremy's not asking this, but I think follow-on question would be, if you are going to vary grip types whilst doing different hangboarding exercises, what's the best way to do it? Should you do it mid-set? Should you do it over the course of different sets? I can't remember who went first. So Maddy, what do you think?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's worth doing repeaters in different grip types. And I think in the sort of realm of this conversation, this plays quite nicely into the specificity element of fingerboarding. Once you've got a really good base there, you might start to think, okay, what do I actually need for my climbing? And it's one of those ways where you can think about varying your stimulus and pushing it more towards what most closely mimics the climbing you're going to do. So this could be in terms of the length and intensity of repeaters. So have you got quite a short, intense sport route? Have you got a longer end sport route? But also with the grips. And I guess what I would just say is, I think it is worth doing repeaters in different grips, but that I would often find, partly because you build the comfort in the grip as well as the strength, is to do max hangs or some sort of hangs in that grip first. Because I think we spoke about it last time, when you start doing repeaters in a grip and you've got that quite short rest interval, you do need to have quite a good understanding of the grip, like the starting position and maintaining that position. I do actually think one thing is quite useful for specific grip repeaters is not that none of them are unuseful, but pockets. So you might do some max hangs of pockets, get into either 3 fingers, or you might do 2 finger ones if you're at that advanced level. But basically pocket repeaters, or for me, climbing on pockets, that sort of power endurance or more endurance side of things. Not only is there obviously the physiological adaptation of endurance in that grip type, but there's also kind of a discomfort for repeaters, and that sort of getting used to that feeling of really powering out, but trying to maintain that grip. So as long as alongside that specificity element of the actual training, you've also got a feeling of fighting a potential burn and a potential slight discomfort of a grip position. Say, I don't know, if someone's heading to Margalef, I think probably building into some repeaters in pockets would not be a bad idea before they go.
Good thinking. And Neil, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree with all that 100%, because it's all from the coal face, and it's all the way that climbers, come up with to adapt to train for their sport. But regarding I think the specific part of the question of how you structure it, you can do both. You can do a session whereby you would do X number of sets, half crimp repeaters, then you'd move on and you do X number of sets, open repeaters. You could alternatively do a whole session where you're only doing half crimp, and then the next time you do a whole session of open. There's even a third option. And this is the thing. We mustn't get into a conversation about which is best, because no one's qualified to answer that. These are just things that you have to try and ways that you can change your training program. Third option is you can alternate within the set. So you do half crimp, 7 seconds, 3 second rest, open 7 seconds, 3 second rest, half crimp, 7 seconds, and you alternate like that. When you do that, you'll learn something, and you'll learn the power of switching grips when you climb. It was something that John Dunn first taught to me, actually. He was like, you try dragging on edges. I was like, what do you mean? You know, I remember ages ago, and it was like this amazing tip that suddenly gave you an extra grade's worth of endurance for free without having to train. Wow. So yeah, you can do that in training.
That's really good. I think the one I'd be aware of is exactly as kind of both of you were saying, but Maddy especially saying that it's really good to be familiar with the different grip types that you're going to use, because that 3-second changeover when you're doing repeaters is really short. If you're looking to go from one grip down to the floor, chalk up, and then back onto a new grip, and it's maybe a hold that you're not that experienced with, or a grip type that you're not as comfortable with, just check that you know where you're going first and get familiar with it. It will save loads of fat.
I sort of agree that you can vary within a session. I guess when we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of wanting to be really specific for a certain grip type, and if this is the reason you're doing it, and I do think when you get to this advanced level, you are probably looking to really push a given stimulus. So I completely agree that it is fine to combine a session, like you could do some half crimp and some open and some pockets. But if you are looking to really train a given element, I personally have found that being like, this is a session where I'm doing pocket repeaters has been good, because you don't dilute that training stimulus, I guess. You know, you really think this is what I'm training and all my sets are going to be on this. And then the other thing, and this is quite a common, I guess I'll say, mistake that I see, is the ordering of repeaters, especially sort of more endurance repeaters after strength work. So pathways for strength and endurance adaptation, or they're different within your muscles, and they actually interfere with each other. So the body is really clever in that it often has pathways and little on-off buttons that create feedback loops within your body. And if you train endurance, the sort of way that's sensed, I guess, in your body, and the adaptations that occur switch off strength adaptations. So I see a lot of people who maybe like they do some max hangs and then they have a short break, and then they maybe do loads of like longer end endurance repeaters. And I think when you start to get to an advanced level, so someone could do that and they could see progress in both. I'm not saying that that wouldn't happen, although you might have reduced progress. But when you start to get to a more advanced level and your body is quite well adapted to each of these stimuluses, and you're really wanting to get the most out of each of them, yeah, I think do repeaters, that's absolutely fine. But maybe think about where you're structuring them in your week so that the endurance element of the fingerboarding is not interfering and impacting any strength work you're doing.
Nice. Oh, that was I'm so glad you dropped that in, Maddy. Welcome to the dilemmas of being a roots climber, a sport climber, as opposed to being a boulderer. That's the biggest, one of the probably the biggest challenge that we face, isn't it? Is making sense of that one. If only there were some easy answers on the back of a postage stamp. But I just wanted to drop in one more thing on that subject about the repeaters and the grips. And that's just when you're doing your half crimp sets, something that I get asked a lot is, should you allow the index to straighten? Because, if you haven't done this before, I'm sure everyone watching this has done this before because it's an advanced fingerboarding discussion. But the experience that you'll have is you'll do, let's say you're aiming to do like 2 minutes of 7 on 3 off of half crimp. And for the first minute, your index is going to be nice and bent, and then it's going to be starting to straighten. And should you kind of allow that to happen is something I get asked quite a lot. My take on this is that, start the set strictly on a strict half crimp, but I don't think it makes sense to terminate the set as soon as that index starts to straighten, because you've got more to give there from an endurance perspective. I think from a strength training perspective, it's a completely different conversation. I would always suggest, if need be, reducing load so that you can maintain that index finger bend. But my personal take, and it's just an opinion, I'm definitely not saying right or wrong, is I would say when training endurance, start off with the index bent and then just continue the set with a straight index. Does that make sense to you, Maddy?
Yeah, I guess it's, I, again, have just mixed thoughts in that, as you're saying, there's not one right or wrong. And it's a bit like with pull-ups, right? When you're doing max pull-ups, people say like, you shouldn't be kicking your legs. And it's like, if I'm going to max, my legs are probably kicking, right? Because that is just like what we're doing to get the most out of ourselves. And like, when we go climbing, do we worry if we slip from the half full crimp position? Probably not. But I guess it's about like using that training tool and making that training tool as effective as possible. So I think that's partly I think slipping within the 7 seconds, I think you do maybe want to be careful from like an injury point of view.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it's hard because it's like if you're failing and you're getting on in that position, that's also different to maybe getting on in half crimp, but slipping throughout that 7 second work window. So I completely get what you're saying, Neil. And I do think that when we go climbing, we flip and do whatever we can to get up there. But potentially it's sort of one of those things like what's the saying? If you give people an inch, they'll go a mile or something. So that maybe maybe if people are starting to slip throughout that, potentially it's worth just reducing the load a bit so you can complete it with the half crimp. But I think if people are doing long end repeaters and slipping a little bit, their load should not be too high.
So my take on that, and I couldn't agree more, is that there's actually a next level of sort of dramatic outcome to this, which is obviously you can start off, with a strict half crimp and then that index will straighten and then all the fingers start to straighten and you drop into like a 3-finger open before eventually letting go of the board. And I would sort of suggest that was the most sort of, the point where I would stop. I mean, on the grounds that you've set the goal for this set as it's a half crimp, dead hang repeater set, and if it goes to a chisel, well, that's enabling you to keep training the sort of relevant muscles and energy systems, whereas if it drops onto that, I think it's gone way past the point. But that's just my take on it.
Well, that's a great answer. So okay, pretty much our last question for this session. CFace510 is asking, are there any drills to help maintain climbing motion when a hangboard is the only training equipment we have available? What do you think, Neil?
I think I touched upon this in the movement discussion that we had, so we can keep this answer super quick. Get a kickboard so you can work on your footwork, put small footholds on it rather than like big ladder rungs that you're standing on in your trainers. And you can do little moves on your fingerboard. If it's that type of fingerboard, you can, sort of do little crossovers and turn out of the crossover. And, just going up and down like that ladder wise isn't really going to be much different to doing footless fingerboarding anyway. But like just, trying to kind of, use different grip types, change the rhythm of it a little bit, dance around on the kickboard. There you go.
That's nice. Maddy, anything to add?
Just one thing, if you've not made a kickboard or you don't have room for that, I'd go and check out Pete Whitaker's Instagram. I think that he has really maximized his fingerboard setup in terms of getting that movement element, and you can make it more difficult by obviously moving the chair or whatever you're using for your feet further away and essentially putting more weight down through your fingers. One other thing that I've done, which I find quite useful to get that contact strength side of things, is I hold onto a jug or something good on my fingerboard and I just jump and I catch the sort of rung of my fingerboard in that half crimp. So you can do like that. You can set and rep it, and that just helps get that catching bit of the hold.
That's a really nice suggestion. If anyone wants a really stupid challenge, I'd recommend you have to have a specific Beastmaker setup. Like at Vauxhall, where I used to do a lot of training, there was a really good one where we had just the Beastmaker was over a good area of the mats. So there was the constant challenge of who can do the longest jump to the worst slopers. Obviously, trying that at home, but that's a ton of fun. I can see it all going, oh my God. It was, not a good idea, but it was very fun. Mostly we just face planted a lot or made some amazing catches. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I've actually tried doing some sort of campsing around the fingerboard, but with my foot in a TheraBand, like, in a resistance band, but you do slightly feel like you could fly backwards. So never know whether to suggest it.
Well, then that brings us on to our very last question, which is what's the main mistake you see climbers make when they're pushing into more advanced fingerboarding? What if people have listened to this whole discussion, thought, yeah, this sounds great, I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Before they do, what one bit of advice would you give them that they should be a little bit careful of? Maddy, what do you think?
Yeah, so I guess the main things, and these are also, they're shaped by the questions I get asked, but they're also shaped by my own personal experience. So changing the stimulus too much or not enough, both ends of the spectrum. People sort of do a max hang test and then they just use the same load for 8 weeks and they wonder why they've not improved. There needs to be a gradual overloading within that, as well as potentially changing the actual stimulus after maybe I don't know, a 12-week period, that could be retesting and then using different weights, or it could be changing the grip position or moving to a different style of hanging, whether that's repeaters or at the strength end, changing that short time, maybe heavier 5-second hangs, 7-second hangs, 10-second hangs, but still going for that like max hang protocol, or changing it too much. I do speak to some people and they're like, I did max hangs for 4 weeks and then I did repeaters for 4 weeks. And that in that period of time, all that you're doing is like making that neurological switch and adaptation to the two different exercises, not allowing deload weeks. So for people listening and they're looking for these like more advanced sort of protocols and potentially wanting to really push past plateaus and stuff like that, is that you will probably need to start to allow some deload periods once you've been training. And it does slightly depend on how much people are doing alongside the training. But if you're like really going for fingerboarding over an extended period, you do probably want to allow deload weeks. And then not maintaining. So not being consistent, and so they're not making like year-on-year gains. Like when we're like talking about more advanced level, these people are probably wanting, as myself, to progress year-on-year. And I think as climbers, with the seasons, we can sort of go through, almost like the same cycle. So you train, you make neurological adaptations, not rather than so much structural ones. You stop training, you go on a climbing trip, you come back, you're back at square one. And I guess what maintaining does is you really reduce the amount of training you're doing. You can reduce the load as well, because you don't need as much just to maintain, but just keep up that little bit. And because you've reduced both the load, the volume and the intensity, you can often do it alongside climbing. Like, I guess if your maintenance training is making you too tired for your climbing, the potential is that it isn't actually maintenance training. And then the last one is the structuring of endurance around strength training, which is something that I have definitely sort of fallen into, like as a trap, in terms of, we want to fit as much in, especially as sport climbers or route climbers. And that means training both endurance and strength. But I've actually really benefited a lot in terms of pushing past a plateau in block training strength. And that's what I've been doing at the moment, really going for a low level of endurance training. So that might be something that people who really struggle with strength gains and find themselves almost leaning towards endurance quite a lot, or maybe completing a lot of endurance training straight after strength training. If it's not possible for you to organize your training so that you can't do that, you do not have enough time in the week, so it has to fit into these like days, and that's the only way you can do it. Actually, maybe try dropping the endurance side of things a bit, and this might give you the sort of room, if you like, to adapt to your strength training.
It's much easier for me. I can sack off all that endurance training. Neil, what do you reckon? Common mistakes that you see?
Well, no, I mean, Maddy's covered them. So I just want to say maybe something a little bit more philosophical, which is just that, at the moment, we've got very little else going on apart from fingerboarding. And, we all care about our climbing a lot. And so therefore, it's natural that we're attaching that level of kind of care and passion to our fingerboarding. And so we should. And that's great. But the backdrop to that is if things don't, you hit a plateau, or maybe you can start to go backwards, you're likely to get quite sort of stressed and anxious about that. And that's understandable, because, I'm as passionate as every other person watching this film about climbing. So I know what that feels like. Sometimes you have a bad session and it can spoil your day, especially in lockdown, when things are kind of, we're a bit pent up, things feel a bit worse than they are. Take a step back. Remember that gains in hangboarding are virtually rarely for anyone are they totally linear. Oh, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Suddenly they'll stop for a bit. It's not the end of the world. They might even go back for a bit. If they do, just do your checks, and don't. The classic trap is to just look at the minutiae of the session, of the protocol, and think, should I be doing density hangs instead of max hangs? It's like, it might not be that type of conversation. It's often something that's different. For example, like, have you been doing your forearm extensors? Because if your extensors have become really weak, you're not going to be making gains in your flexors, because your body wants to maintain that ratio. Or is it something else? Is it your stress levels? Has something happened in the family? Has it been one of those weeks? Just look at the bigger picture. And above all else, don't worry about it, because it all comes good in the end. And sometimes you just have to switch to that mentality of, it's better that you did the session. It's better that you put something in the bank. And even if you didn't, the next session, see a reward for that, trust me, it is in there somewhere, hiding for you, waiting to pay you back at some point in the future.
And that's lovely closing advice, and a general festival of advanced fingerboarding knowledge. Thank you both so much for all the information today. I hope you've all enjoyed it watching at home. And thank you again to UKC for putting together these panel debates. Goodbye from me, Louis. Goodbye from Maddy.
Bye.
I should say goodbye with a half crimp, shouldn't I?
Oh yeah.
Or an open. No, it's an open goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody. See you later.